I should begin by letting you know that we're missing one of our speakers who's had a family emergency late last night and had to leave San Francisco to return to his home base in Iowa. He's Jack Perry, and in our discussion today, he's with a startup company doing some very interesting things called SyncBack. And I'll bring up some of the things that they're doing as part of the discussion to get some reactions from those ideas and from Spencer and Laura. Let me introduce them. We have Laura Martin, who is the Managing Director and Senior Analyst for Entertainment, Cable, and Media at Needham Company. Laura has a long background in not only financial analysis, but also as an entrepreneur in her own right. She had, in 2004, founded a couple of companies, Capital Knowledge and Media Metrics, which were well recognized as leading boutique investment and researching companies. And she has also been an executive vice president for financial strategy and investor relations for Vivendi in Paris. And with us, too, is Spencer Wang, who is the managing director and head of U.S. media and internet equity research for Credit Suisse. And Spencer has been a leading light in investment analysis for some time with a variety of companies. Prior to Credit Suisse, he was with Bear Stearns. He's been with J.P. Morgan and Solomon Smith Barney, and is widely recognized as one of the leading voices in the marketplace.
I'm running out of banks to go to.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, with the turmoil in the marketplace, I'm sure there will be new ones to come up.
That's right.
So let's begin. I wanted to get our discussion going, which is generally going to be about how the relationships are evolving across the media and service provider distribution markets as everybody tries to figure out what is going on and how to respond to what's going on in the marketplace with consumer demand and with the kinds of things that we saw with Nate in the statistics shown there with things like social media and the emergence of tablets is a real force to be reckoned with, and of course the whole over-the-top phenomenon. So I'm going to ask that Laura and Spencer share with us first of all, just what they are focused on in the marketplace, and then just briefly describing their roles. And then once we have that question answered, I'll ask them to share with us some of the research that they are following and that in some cases generating. So Laura, why don't you just give us a brief synopsis of your...
Sure. So I think Spencer and I share a similar seat, but it's a rare seat where I cover Silicon Valley companies as well as covering the old media, cable, and internet companies. And I think in these rapidly changing times, it's really dangerous to think you have answers. And so I actually don't spend a lot of time thinking about answers. I spend a lot of time thinking about what the right questions are, and they change. And I think that framework for me allows me to dynamically update data points and keep thinking about what the right questions might be. So one of the questions I'm thinking about a lot right now is, what are the implications of the fact that the media companies in the new world have market caps of $200 to $300 billion, which is more than the entire old economy entertainment companies combined. So when we think about Apple at $365 billion of market cap, Facebook, which wasn't even public now, at $100 billion, Amazon at $100 billion, Microsoft at $200 billion, Google at $200 billion, any of those companies could actually buy the entire old economy, Disney, News Corp, CBS, Viacom. What are the implications of that for the new world? And what does that mean for the competitive advantage period of old media? And what does it mean for employee requirements, movements? So I'm thinking a lot about that, how the competitive landscape is being redefined by the rapid growth trajectory and enormous size that these new media competitors take on over a decade. Something that is larger than the 50-year-old companies that I tend to be my core business. So that's one question I'm thinking about. I'm thinking a lot about the changing nature of employees. So one of the things that's happening is this definition of generation that used to be 30 years is now shrinking to 15 years, both in terms of how you target products, but also in terms of how you hire people. As you probably know, any of you that have 18-year-olds, they're an incredibly entitled group. They don't want to start in the mailroom like William Morris, like our predecessor speaker. They want to be a vice president and get paid just to show up at work. What does that mean for the types of companies they're willing to work for? And what does it mean for companies like Comcast, who really are engineers, and they really do have 10-year horizons because they're building out infrastructure? So that's actually really interesting to me too, the changing nature of employees and talent that are coming into the workforce and what that means for what kinds of products ultimately come to the consumers. And then on the consumer side, I guess the question I'm focusing on the most is, where does the money come from? Because I think one of the most, and this is my last point, Spence, and then you talk.
No worries, take your time.
One of the most interesting points to me, or one of the most interesting changes that's happening in the world is when you and I used to talk about Nielsen and media delivery, we used to think about households. How many households? 85% penetration of multi-channel video in 110 million households. All of the screens that we've been talking about for the last 3 days are about personal. I don't hand my phone to Spencer. I have a heart attack when my phone gets lost. It's a personal device. It costs me $110 a month. Actually, I have two because I'm a Wall Street analyst. So actually, they both cost me $110, and they are personal devices. You're going to deliver advertising targeted to me on those devices. That's interesting. Where does the money come from? 12% tablet penetration. Those are personal devices. Big denominator, there's 300 million people in America alone. So we're no longer thinking about households, we're thinking about personal devices. Every one of these personal devices costs hundreds of dollars, and the network fees to keep them up is $100 a month. The consumers, we have 9% unemployment rates. The consumer's under cost pressure. Where is the money coming from to fund these new devices from a consumer-facing point of view? I'm really interested in that question. So those are the three questions that I'm thinking about a lot. And that's what I spend a lot of time doing, is creating the best questions. Don't answer them, Sense, because they don't have answers.
All right, so good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us. So I'm Spencer Wang. I head up the Internet, Media, and Telecom team at Credit Suisse. But my personal coverage focuses on both large cap media as well as large cap internet companies. So I personally cover Google, Amazon, Yahoo, eBay, Time Warner, Disney, Viacom, News Corp, Discovery, and I don't think I missed any. So that's my coverage list. But over the past probably 18 months, I've been super focused on the over-the-top video concept, and I'm probably one of the least popular people in the media industry because we authored it.
Downgraded everything.
Last September, because our general perspective is that the over-the-top video trend is here to stay, and it will likely cause a slow unraveling of the pay television business over the next several years. Timing is hard to say, obviously, but the very simple belief that we have is, number one, more and more video will be IP delivered. Number two, consumers want their content on demand. And number three, across multiple different platforms. And the paid television subscription, while many years ago was a great value for consumers, we think that value proposition is eroding pretty quickly. So just to share a few stats, 10 years ago, the average home in the US could receive 63 channels. Now it receives over 135. The problem is that the average person only watches 16 channels, and 10 years ago, they watched 11. So there is this growing gap between what the paid television companies are offering consumers and what they're actually consuming. And on top of that, they keep raising price every year. So the compound annual increase in paid television bills over the past 20 years is about 7%. It's actually been higher than core inflation and the general CPI in 15 out of the past 16 years. So they're basically offering people more stuff that they're not consuming, and they're making them pay more for it. And that's what exposes the industry to disruption. And this is where our viewpoint is fairly nuanced. Some would interpret this and say, well, that's not good for Time Warner Cable or DirecTV or Dish or some of the distributors. I actually see the biggest risk to the cable programmers. So these are the channels like MTV and ESPN and CNN and Fox News. And the reason is, quite simply, they're the ones that are over-earning the most from the current ecosystem. They are the ones with 40% EBITDA margins, 1 to 2% capex to revenue ratios, and generate a lot of free cash flow and generate supernormal returns on investment. And that's arguably not sustainable and what leaves them exposed to disruption over the coming years. So we're not predicting that they're going to go away per se, but we're just predicting that the marginal economics are going to get worse, and that they will likely be smaller businesses. So I don't want to drone on too long, but that's what I would say we've been singularly focused on in terms of the convergence theme over the past 18 months.
Well, thank you. Laura, let's begin in terms of where we go with what Spencer just said, to hear how you look at some of the same metrics and the extent to which you feel that the marketplace is reacting in ways that are going to counter this or not. I mean, are these trends locked in as far as your mind is concerned?
So firstly, let me say Spencer is doing some of the best work in this over-the-top space, and he's hugely controversial. But I will tell you, on Wall Street, that's what you get paid for. You absolutely do not get paid to agree with your accounts because you're not adding value to their world. So what Spencer and I do for a living is fight with the smartest people on earth all the time.
Does this mean I'm going to get paid more this year?
Yes,
Okay,
it means you get
good.
paid more. You certainly should.
good to
But
know.
anyway, Spencer is really doing excellent work here. And again, I don't believe in answers. So I think Spencer's point of view is valuable because it is a point of view. And we can all fight with him, and that's good because it raises the dialogue. What I would say is this. So again, I'm going to push back at Spencer because that's what I get paid to do, push back at smart people. So I would say this. I would say one of the important point here is Spencer's focusing on the right ecosystem because the TV ecosystem is 3 times larger than film, and it by far has the most constituencies with things at risk. When you look at the ecosystem here, it's hundreds of companies, many of them enormous from the old economy point of view, and they have a lot at stake with different agendas. So one of the 3 key points I'd make about the TV ecosystem are, 1, it is enormous. Again, in an old world context, $150 billion of revenue a year and over $350 billion of public market cap a year, same size as Apple, as I'll note. But anyway, the point of that is there's a lot at stake, and therefore there are a lot of competitors, would-be competitors, Roku, Netgear, coming at it because there's all this money to be had. And so I really agree with Spencer that the innovators in the Silicon Valley and the innovators just in normal entrepreneurs are going to keep nipping at the outside of the TV ecosystem because there's so much money sitting there. The second thing I'd say is much of the TV ecosystem is governed by long-term contracts with affiliates, long-term contracts with content owners, long-term contracts with people. Therefore, change is slow. It's slower than technology changes, and it's much slower than what the consumer wants because content guys just can't do X or Y. It's unclear where the rights sit. These linear channels Spencer's mentioned about, they can't just put the linear channel onto the internet because they don't have the rights for every other program to do that. So some of these changes are slow. I guess another thing I'd say is that the TV ecosystem has had the benefit of the complete annihilation of newspapers, yellow pages, and music. And so it is very cautious. I would argue that the reason that music got destroyed was not theft, but it was unbundling. Because what theft allowed is perfect substitutes. You could steal the same song as the leading song on the new Lady Gaga album. And so why would you buy the song? So then the iTunes store solved that. You could buy a 99-cent song. Most people prefer to be legal. They paid for the one song. They didn't pay for the $10 DVD. That unbundling is now bottoming, thank God, in the music business, but it destroyed the music business. Guess what the TV ecosystem is? It is bundle on top of bundle on top of bundle. So to Spencer's point, these cable channels take a single great program like Mad Men on Bravo, and they put crap around it, and then they try to launch their next show. And actually, Bravo's actually doing a kick-ass job. So is AMC right now programming their networks. But it is a bundle of shows, and then that owner walks in and he says, you can't just buy MTV. You have to buy Comedy Central. You got to buy Nickelodeon. This is Viacom I'm talking about. And you know you got like 10 channels you don't want, Time Warner Cable. Here's my bundle of 12 channels you don't want. Same with Disney. ESPN, you can't just get the core channel. Well, you can. The core channel of Disney, which is a bundle of content, including the NFL, is $5. But if you're willing to buy ESPN 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 12, It's only $4 for those 12 because they sell ad time and generate more revenue. So each of the owners of content bundle, they sell it to Time Warner. Time Warner then bundles it to the customer, and you can only buy one of 3 bundles. So it's bundled on bundled on bundled, which is one of the reasons it's so economically profitable. So disengaging that isn't really in anyone's interest.
Right.
Push back.
And I think Laura makes a good point, and I think that's actually the ultimate point, which is, if you take a step back, what has the internet proven really, really good at doing?
Unbundling.
Thank you. And as you pointed out, the paid television business is predicated on the idea of bundles, right? So I know when we talk to a lot of traditional investors, they look at me like I have 3 heads when I walk them through, why there's so much risk in the business right now. But if you take a step back and look at it that way, say, well, what has the internet been really good at doing? It's been really good at unbundling things and increasing transparency of value and price to the end consumer. And so all these things we hear when you talk to consumers, and you hear things like, I have 500 channels, but I can't find anything to watch. Or why do I pay for all these channels that I don't need? Why do I pay for ESPN when I don't watch sports? All these things are indicative of I think the value proposition risk in the paid television business. So I just wanted to add to
Right,
that.
and I want to build on something Spencer said. I think we're all doing a bad job on Wall Street, and Spencer's going to push us to do a better job. We talk about content. Okay, well, you guys don't do this for a living. You can talk about content. That's like it's a generality we should not be allowed to use on Wall Street. I would argue that who benefits the most even in Spencer's world, is the guy who owns the rights to his content, and he has proven he can make hit content after hit content after hit content. Who is that? CBS. Who is that? In some cases, Fox. NBC and ABC should be able to do that. They should get new teams. They should make better content. Great. You know who and that's a different kind of content, I would argue, than the guys who own content like Food Network, where they own the rights, but it's reality content, and the guys on the internet can create generally substitutive stuff, maybe. The guys who are the worst positioned are the guys that Spencer's bringing up, are like TBS, where all they do is buy somebody else's content. They don't have the right to resell it, and they're going to become commoditized because their competitive advantage is just bundling, or that we call programming a network and then selling it to somebody. That's hugely threatened in Spencer's world because they actually don't have a competitive advantage that they can sell internationally, that they can control the rights to decide to sell to Netflix or not. So I think on Wall Street, Spencer's going to force us to differentiate between types of content and what is more and less valuable in the new world as content goes. Does that make sense?
No, I think that's exactly right.
We have some agreement here.
Yeah, we do. We have a lot.
And the main point of agreement is content is king.
Sometimes.
I mean, you talk about the capitalization of Apple and Facebook and Google and all the rest that you rattled off, and they're huge, but it's apples and oranges in the sense that these aren't the content creators. These are the
Correct.
content users. They are exploiting content through the creation of new devices, through the creation of new outlets, search, all the things that they do, socialization. Very, very innovative ways of creating value in their own right around what their core value proposition was in the first place, but then bringing content into their spaces and leveraging that even further. I would argue that that's not necessarily a competitive, threatening thing. That's an opportunistic thing for smart content people. And it seems to me that the content people have an opportunity, and I think a lot of the foment we see right now is trying to figure out what that opportunity is without cannibalizing the past revenue streams. But they have a tremendous amount of opportunity through creative, inventive ways of doing things, like we heard from Anthony Zeiker on our first day, to change the game. Yeah. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about where you see some of those game-changing strategies coming about to counter some of what you're talking about.
So I think Laura raised a good point, which is understanding the supply chain is really important, and the content creators probably benefit the most from the emergence of Apple and these new technologies because they're new distribution formats. But it's not going to be all easy. People like to say content's king, as you said, Fred, but I like to say that's not really true. Good content is king, and there's quite a lot of bad content out there. And the fundamental truth is that it's really, really hard to make really good content on a consistent basis, right? And so I like to say to people, no studio executive or network executive or content producer starts off with the premise, I want to make a terrible TV show, right? But it happens. Or I want to make a terrible movie, but it happens.
I would disagree. They have to be getting with that
premise.
point of view
Could
based
be.
on
Maybe
what
there
we're
are some
seeing
some
as-
examples. But so my only point here is that it's a really hit-driven nature, and it's very, very hard to do consistently. I would say that in my, and Laura would probably agree with this, I think in my career I've seen one company that has been able to do that consistently, which is Pixar. And I think their competitive.
Narrow niche.
You're right, and I think their competitive advantage is actually their culture and something that Laura talked about in terms of the people that you have and hire. But away from that, what that means is, yes, the content business can benefit from all these trends, but you have to have the right content, and you have to be able to institutionalize making the premium, best quality stuff. Because the other impact from digital is that the barriers to content creation are declining very fast. So 10 years ago, the only people, really, companies that could create and globally distribute content were some combination or iteration of Time Warner, Viacom, News Corp, Disney, and CBS. And at some points they were together, at some points they were breaking up, but it was pretty finite. Now, the simple fact of the matter is that, I can walk into Best Buy, buy a video camera, shoot some footage, edit it with free software from Apple, upload it to YouTube, and I have instant global distribution. Doesn't mean that anybody's going to necessarily watch it, but the reality is that what is really scarce now isn't distribution, it's not content, because there's plenty of that now. What's really scarce is consumer attention. And that's what I think a lot of people are going to have to solve for. And so the content business can benefit from a lot of these trends, but I'm not sure it's going to be that easy.
Well,
either.
let me bring up an example. I mentioned Anthony Zeiker, who was our keynote on opening day. And this is a good talking point because it goes to how content providers can leverage these opportunities and still maintain that anchor position in traditional television series and programming for a mass audience in prime time. But building on that in a way that extends the value of what they're creating by leveraging these other outlets. So in Zeiker's case, it's a matter of creating a series such as he's working with ABC on right now, the Chameleon series that involves a story of a woman who's with LAPD as a master of disguises. So she's very successful, and she's out there beating the world week in, week out with their 1-hour series. But meanwhile, there's this whole backstory that's getting exposed online for the fans that is about this woman's private life and who she really is. And so for those who want to engage in and who are passionate about that program series, if it ever comes to light, we'll have an opportunity to have a whole different experience of what is a very good show, hour to hour, week to week, on the back channel, and in that context, gain access to it on multiple devices. There'll be games built around it. And the idea is bake that whole strategy in from the very pilot start of a program series so that you're creating something that is leveraging all these things, the social outlets, interaction with the directors, with the actors, through social media in that space that those fans can go to online, creating that backstory, creating a whole different environment for those that really like the program. And that, of course, creates more engagement. It creates more eyeballs over a period of time. So no matter how fragmented the audiences get, if you capture that passionate audience for good content, you have them over more exposure for more advertising. So I'm just wondering, as a strategy, totally apart from whether he succeeds or not, does that make sense to you guys?
Laura,
No, go ahead, Spence.
Sure, I think it makes sense. I mean, I think if you take a step back, if you have a great piece of content, I think you probably want to super serve your audience, right? And allow them to immerse themselves in that world or that storyline or that character. I think that's a great way to evolve just the linear storytelling format that we have. And I think that's going to be the other interesting thing that I certainly have a less clear view on. So I have a very clear view, I think, of how the pay television business works out. I think I have a pretty clear view of how competition impacts the content production side. But when I talk to the artists and the creators in Hollywood, I think they're doing the interesting, exciting work, and they're trying to figure out how to make their storytelling more interactive and more engaging for consumers, like Anthony's example. And that requires, like, real creativity, which is way beyond my scope of knowledge. And so I'm just really excited to see how they take advantage of it. And nobody really knows, because if you go back, decades when television first came out, the first TV shows were just radio shows, but you could see it, right? So it took people a while to figure out, well, what's going to work in the new medium, right? Sitcoms in the case of television, one-hour dramas. So nobody really knows, but it's going to be really exciting from that perspective. If I knew, I'd invest in it.
So what I would say is that I think one of the most interesting things about the internet is we get a lot of innovation. So I'm talking to a company, and I'm really fascinated because they're stealing something from the internet and bringing it back to the old world. There's a show that's been sold to NBC. It's called, I'm going to forget, Fashion Star. And it's co-hosted. It's kind of like, if you guys have heard of this movie, America's Next Top Model, which is curated or I guess narrated by Tyra Banks?
Tyra Banks.
Tyra Banks. Okay, this is the same idea, and I forget, it's another Claudia Schiffer or one of these other supermodels. But anyway, it's about fashion, making fashion stuff. But here's what's cool about it, and here's what's innovative about it. It's on the Old World platform. It's on an NBC broadcast network, as old as you get. It is a primetime show. It's a competition show. We bring in 10 people. They do fashions. They have expert voters. They vote. They know who wins. They then air it 3 months later, and the day they announce the winner on the NBC platform, her or his goods are available in H&M, Macy's, and one other store that day. And everything that is sold, it goes, part of the percentage of the money goes back to NBC and back to the show creator. So this is a convergence of advertising, content, and commerce put into the old world, and the old world has a lot more money, 10 to 20 times as much capital, or revenue. So this is something they're stealing from the internet and bringing back into the old world, and believe me, if this works, watch it take off like wildfire. It's CBS, ABC. So one of the things that's the most interesting right now, one of the best, I think, things you can do right now is watch who's innovating. And the guys who are innovating are sitting on the youngest side of the TV demo. Watch what the CW is doing with content, social, and commerce. What Fox with Glee is doing in real-time social, curated. When you look at the Twitter charts, right? Twitter goes through the roof every time Glee is on because, the joke is that the scriptwriter for the evil woman cheerleader actually writes more for Twitter than she does for the show because they all repeat what she says because it's so socially applicable to their world. So the point is this concept of engagement is really important because you want to hold people longer. And there's one statistic I would really caution you. When people I cover Yahoo and AOL, when they say, oh, we have 100 million, unique users a month, those users may come and spend 30 seconds. But when you get a rating of 20 for American Idol, that is the entire hour's average rating, over which you sold 14 minutes of commercials. So, we only measure commercial ratings now, but you had 20 million people glued to a show for an hour. So elongating attention spans is really important. Just to building on one point Spence made about the challenge of the internet is discovery. I actually wouldn't call it consumer attention, but I would call it discovery. That there's so much junk out there in the real world that it is really hard to find the good stuff. And so Facebook creates discovery opportunities. This is the power of Facebook, I think. By having your social network and you trusting people on it, your social network says, read this book. Don't go see this movie. And that is a way to organize the world's information, and therefore it threatens Google. Because what Google used to do for you is organize the world's information. Now Facebook is creating discovery in a new way through your social, and Twitter does too, right? You can follow people you like on Twitter, and they recommend things that they saw, they did. All of that helps you organize the world's information in new ways that Google doesn't.
I think these are great observations as to the opportunities that are out there for the content creators. If we could, let's shift to the distribution side, where they're joined at the hip, whether they like it or not. And so it's a question of how do the distributors go through what's happening with the threat of more and more loss to a la carte and over the top. What do you see that is going on either through their interactions and work with the content providers, possibly to get into the kinds of low-tier bundling that Time Warner Cable and Comcast are experimenting with, or through other means of somehow making sure that the consumer stays with them?
So I think Laura made a good point earlier, which is one of the reasons why the media industry is so slow is that they are governed by long-term contracts. But those contracts also prevent them from doing what would be logical, which is to offer thinner programming packages to consumers. So when you're 85% penetrated, to have a largely one-size-fit-all offering for America, for your pay television offering, when everybody has different household income levels, different amounts of television usage, is kind of silly. But those contracts prevent them from doing that in a particularly aggressive manner. I think what's interesting for a distributor, particularly the cable companies, I'm actually really excited by the cable industry right now if they can come to the realization that they're not video companies. And what I mean by that is they are, in my opinion, broadband companies. And over time, what's going to happen is video will just be one more application they deliver over their IP network. If they can come to grips with that, in my opinion, fundamental reality, then they have a great opportunity, because they have, with the exception of Fios, the best pipe into the home and not much in the way of competition. So I think that if they choose to, they can really reinvent themselves and take advantage of all of these trends that we're seeing towards convergence of devices, convergence of services and things like that, and really win if they shift their perspective.
So Glenn Britt was talking to you before he announced that Time Warner Cable is no longer in the TV business. They are a broadband company. I don't know about that, but what you're saying, though, is exactly what's happening in the cable industry with respect to all the technology foment. I was in Atlanta at the SCTE Expo show a couple weeks back, and it was shocking the change between just the NCTA show in June or May and what I saw in Atlanta, from the standpoint of how far things have moved toward what you're talking about. Right. Accelerating this migration IP, turning everything into this converged experience from the end user perspective, but also from the management perspective and the network operating perspective, to accelerate the launch of services and applications. Around that, I want to ask a question as to the licensing issue you just mentioned. We've seen how hard it was for Time Warner Cable to get support for doing the iPad live streaming service. And the showdown with Viacom and all that. But now things seem to have begun to move a little better. And then we have TV Everywhere, which began as a PC access to premium content with very limited on-demand. Now that's starting to blend into the multi-screen environment, some of it live. So talk to me a little bit about what degree of cooperation you're seeing around licensing to allow this kind of service to breathe and change.
Well, I mean, so there's a bunch of things going on here. So one of the important points is, so Time Warner Cable, you probably know, just started streaming all the deals it had done over an iPad device in the home, and said, hey, we bought the rights. What's the difference between an iPad screen and the third television in the house? The consumer's sitting in the house. He has the right to watch X Factor on Fox over his television set. What's the difference if he's watching on an iPad? Here's the difference. The difference is Nielsen doesn't measure non-TV viewing. So today, they will, but not today. So if Time Warner, if somebody suddenly decides to, a 12-year-old kid who prefers to watch it on the iPad, watches it here and not there and doesn't turn on the TV set, suddenly they lost 12 minutes of advertising in that hour. They didn't get any credit for the ads because, Nielsen only measures the ad viewing. And they didn't play it back on their DVR because they watched it real time. That's a problem today. That is real money. So part of this gets solved with time because Nielsen knows it has to move and measure these mobile devices. So I would say that's one of the reasons it was, there was such by the way, a lot of the content guys said, we just want to be watched. It's like Lady Gaga, I just want to be heard. So they said, fine, keep it, Time Warner, and we'll just eat the money that we're losing. But other guys, like Viacom, said, absolutely not. We want to get paid for our TV viewership, so we want to force the consumer to watch it on the TV. Perfectly logical today. I mean, I totally get both positions. But that is one of the things that's slowing the migration of content guys to mobile devices is because they lose the money when something's watched on an iPad or an iPhone. And that's a real economic hardship. So I really...
Tremendous irony to that, given the extent to which metrics on the web have become so accurate and good, and this is delivered over IP, and yet because it doesn't fall into the Nielsen basket, it suddenly doesn't count.
Yeah, there's been a lot of bashing of Nielsen the last 2 days. I would really... And by the way, I cover Nielsen. And the mistakes those people make, however... And when you think of the TV ecosystem and you think about the fact it does $150 billion a year, you know what the center point is that allows that? Is there is something called a currency, and it is Nielsen. And whether or not we fight, I hand you my ratings, you hand me the cash. We do not speak more, we go back to our core jobs. You start using ComScore, TRA, Rent-Track data. We are all going to sit there and fight about it. What the discount is, what does it really mean, is it really representative of the sample? We spend hours fighting over the data and how much I should pay you for the data. So whether or not Nielsen is accurate, over the last 30 years, it has become a currency over which the TV ecosystem has bonded. And I got to tell you, people really underestimate how smoothly the transition went from program ratings 5 years ago to C+3, where the advertiser is only required to pay for commercial ratings in the 3 days on DVRs. It was handled so beautifully, didn't disrupt the TV ecosystem's monetary. I mean, it was just amazingly a difficult thing to accomplish. So what I would say is Nielsen sits at the core of the monetization. And one of the reasons all of these over-the-top things will take longer to monetize is they do not have a currency. Until Nielsen arrives, they do not have a currency. And the currency is decided by, I liked that guy's characterization, Hollywood plus, Madison Square Garden plus, Silicon Valley. All three of those, hundreds of companies, have to decide that something's a currency. And right now, everybody has Nielsen as a currency. So as they ponderously go into this new space, I bet that is the best chance that the over-the-top guys have of monetizing is the day Nielsen arrives. And this other stuff, it's really hard for huge
Would you agree with
ecosystems.
that, Spencer?
What's that?
I'm asking Spencer if he would agree with that.
So I guess leaving aside Nielsen, which I don't cover, I'm just a customer. I think they overcharge me, frankly. But
Probably.
They're a monopoly, right?
Yep,
So they have the
they
right
are.
to do that. So I think the question was around cooperation, right? And I would say, I don't think that there's a lot of cooperation right now in the industry, quite frankly. TV everywhere has taken a long time to get going. And still is nowhere near a robust product, in my opinion. I think they can get there over time, but as Laura alluded to, a lot of it's rights issues, but a lot of it is money. And I think that is the heart of the issue where there continues to be a lot of tension. It's money. So some programmers want to get paid to offer the authentication or TV everywhere rights to the distributors, and at the same time they undermine the authentication effort by also licensing the content to over-the-top players too, and they want to have their cake and eat it too. And I think that's what's really interesting right now is that in the old days the programmers and the cable distributors were highly aligned, right? Because they were battling a common enemy, which was the broadcasters. So back then, the cable MSOs wanted to sell more subscriptions and they needed more content. And so Ted Turner and the cable industry got along fabulously by and large, right? Now those interests are diverging. And I think that's, where you have a lot of these skirmishes take place, and frankly, they center around money and getting paid more. And that's quite frankly where Netflix figured it out, right? Quite honestly, 2 years ago, was they figured in Hollywood, one thing really matters, which is how much you pay executives for their content.
Well, that all adds up to two major points here. One is the need for the currency to exploit the outlets that are beyond the traditional television measurement vein, and that we've heard that point made other times here at this show, and I think it's a very valid and strong barrier. And then this other one, which is, you know, it reminds one of what's going on in Washington. You know, everybody's talking about gloom and doom and the disaster that looms ahead, and yet everybody's taking divergent paths and not cooperating on getting a solution. And so that leads to an interesting perspective on what the distributors might do and what kind of actions they might take that may or may not be in their best interest long term. Certainly depend on the cooperation of the license holders. But a couple of things I want to address there. One is this idea that's floated now. We've reported on it from the perspective of what Verizon's talking about with Fios. There's some rumors about Comcast looking in these directions and others, which is to take their brands outside their territorial boundaries through broadband and offer a premium service subscription that would basically be going against their brethren in the telephone or cable industries that they've traditionally not competed with. So I wonder if each of you would just briefly address whether that has any legs, whether there's any potential for that actually to come to fruition, and what its implications would be.
I've heard the same things about a large MSO going out of market with an over-the-top or IP-delivered offering. I've asked said MSO directly, point blank about it, and their answer is no. That being said, I think there's probably a 50-50 chance that happens in the next couple of years. And I think it's a really interesting idea, and I think let me take a step back. It's probably the nuclear option for the distributors, because then all of a sudden you have a lot of different distributors potentially trying to get into each other's marketplaces, and competition intensifies significantly. But I would say, I would think that if you're the scale player in the business, it may actually make a lot of sense, right? So if you take Comcast as an example, as the biggest distributor out there, they have hundreds of people in Comcast Interactive Media running around Philadelphia developing stuff. They also have the biggest subscriber base to buy content most efficiently. So in a world where it gets ultra competitive from that standpoint, I can make the case that the scale player like a Comcast can actually do very well, because it's going to be very hard for, say, like a Charter, who's much smaller, with fewer resources, who buys programming at a higher per sub rate, to compete from that perspective. So I don't know if it's going to happen. I think it's a distinct possibility, and I think the world gets really, really interesting, and it probably favors the scale player.
Okay, I'm going to give you an answer. In the next 10 years, no cable operator will compete out of market. Okay, that's going to take a strong point. 3 key points. One is the entire cable industry has collaborated through its entire existence because it was capital intensive, and even today, they all share best practices. So if, as you guys probably know, Comcast is doing really cool things with its Xfinity on the iPad app. Cox wants to come in and see it, they show it to them. Time Warner wants to come in and they see it, they show it to them. They split up litigation expenses, like CVC, which is Cablevision, took on all the litigation expense around the network DVR, and Time Warner Cable went to the content guys and negotiated kind of fast forward, fast back. You could look back 12 hours, you could look out, I can't remember what they called it. What was that product called?
Look back.
Look back, and it was first 12 hours, then they negotiated 24 hours. It was like a network DVR idea. And then the minute one guy does all the work, the other guys become fast followers. They all have best practice. They all have most favored nations in their contracts. So to date, the cable industry has been really collaborative. And until this set of CEOs turn over, I do not see them undermining that. And another piece of evidence I would use is when the telcos came in with broadband, which was better than theirs at the beginning, the DSL. The telcos took the price point down. All the cable guys had decided to price at $40, which of course is illegal, but it was an amazing thing across the entire US. Everyone's modem bill was $40 a month. The telco said, oh, we want to buy share, we'll do it at 25. The entire cable industry didn't move. No one met the telco price because they are owner-operators generally. And so they said, no, we're not going to cut our price. There's two competitors. And eventually the telco, after losing money for a year, said, okay, we'll still be the price competitor. They raised it to $38. So the guys who wanted to be cheap bought it at $38 a month from a telco, not $40. Okay, so they've really had very good economic luck working in tandem. The guy who is the most likely guy to do this out-of-market stuff is your dish guys, your satellite guys, because they've always competed on a national footprint, and they are backed into a corner. Because if, like the three of us on this panel think, broadband is the future, and video just continues to get margin compression, what in the heck do you do if you're Charlie Ergen, who owns EchoStar, or if you're DirecTV? They don't have a bundled product. They only have video, and it's under enormous margin pressure. Those are the guys to watch as the rats in the corner that are used to competing on a national framework, that I think they are the interesting guys to watch, how they rebundle their product and sell vis-a-vis the cable industry. I do not see until Brian Roberts drops dead, and he's only my age, I do not see the cable industry competing with itself.
Okay, well, that's a pretty firm prediction, and
It's an answer. Give you an answer.
Yeah. For someone who doesn't like to give answers, it must be a very, very strong
sounds very-
conviction. You know, I guess my pushback on that would be, irrespective of cable's collaborative tendencies, there are also some seriously centrifugal forces that have been pushing them apart on some issues. But then you do have the telcos, and you do have Fios that is, you know, willing to state publicly to at least us and we've reported this in our magazine, that they are looking seriously. They haven't committed to it, but they're looking to see if they can do this. My suggestion would be, if they manage to get the licensing permission to do it, and they start making their Fios offering that they're now giving to subscribers to access on their mobile phones anywhere, that same access to mobile subscribers who aren't in territory subscription subscribers, that could just break things apart enough to force a Comcast or one of these other guys to move ahead. So who knows? But it's an interesting thing. I'll get to questions in just a minute. But I wanted to bring up one thing I mentioned at the beginning. I would reference what SyncBack is all about, because we do have another distributor here, which is the local broadcast stations, and these are people that are battling for their lives, and they're up against these same trends, and so. The idea is, how can they get involved to where they can serve their marketplace in a multi-screen environment using broadband, using IP, to give their constituency, which has free rights to view whatever they deliver on air, the same rights to deliver what they deliver on air over broadband, to see that. And SyncBack is all about creating a technology that makes sure that no one watching a given local station who is not in that station's footprint gets to view their programming, but those that are get to view it online, and so that becomes a licensing challenge if the technology really works. He's got backing of NAB and the Consumer Electronics Association, and several station groups are now in beta testing this idea. So this is kind of about survival on the local level of the broadcast stations, but were they to get that opportunity, I would posit that would kind of change the over-the-top game, certainly from the standpoint of exposing material that otherwise you couldn't get on broadband as it appears on TV.
You could. I think the broadcasters are just in a very tough position. I mean, I'd be surprised if they could negotiate those rights, especially with the network partners. And I don't know. I just feel like confining services to geographic boundaries is like not going to work, because the other thing, you know, we talked about, what is the internet very good at doing? Some bundling things. It's increasing transparency of price. It's also very good at breaking down geographic borders, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
Internationally.
right.
right.
So, but you can only watch this piece of content within this like square mile radius. I don't know. Probably not going to work.
Well, we're in a GPS era. I mean, they're claiming they have a technology that allows that to happen, so who knows? But it becomes a licensing issue if the technology works, certainly. But I didn't want to avoid bringing up the broadcast side of this. Okay, I think we've covered the ground that we wanted to go over here, and in the time remaining, Stuart.
Hey,
Hold on a second. Can we get a mic up for the questions?
It's coming.
Our mic carrier did a sprint in 50 yards in 5 seconds at the beginning of the show. He's now down to 4.5. He's really...
Thanks, Fred. So I'm Stuart Schley. I do some research and writing in this area. And Spencer, I'm curious to know how your thesis about kind of the inevitable degradation of the bundled pay TV model is influenced by this knowledge that we sort of are beginning to get, that there's likely to be the institution of a tiered broadband pricing approach as soon as next year. So how does the consumer, if the consumer sort of starts to perceive that the cost of Netflix streaming isn't $8 a month, but $48 a month, depending on how these bits are priced, how does that influence kind of your feeling about the future?
Sure, we've done a lot of work on broadband pricing, and I think there are two ways it can go. It can go tiered or it can go consumption-based. And I think it'll play out differently depending on which path happens. So the conversation I had with a large MSO recently was, if you believe the premise that you are a broadband company, your biggest challenge is making sure you can get people to pay more for broadband to offset your lost profits from video. So why would you not work with an over-the-top player like a Netflix or a Hulu or whoever and offer $60 broadband and a free month of Netflix or something like that? So from that perspective, then they accelerate that migration to broadband. They can get a higher ARPU for broadband, and also emphasize that they have one of the fastest pipes into the home, certainly more so than LTE when that comes, or even DSL, obviously. So I think there could actually be a natural partnership there, because then that creates the low-end offering that they can't create today, right? So for the household in America that makes less than $50,000 a year, where everybody's working 2 jobs, trying to pay the mortgage and the groceries, and guess what? They don't, leave aside that they don't want to pay $70 for TV, they can't afford to pay it, right? So you give them, but they probably still have broadband anyway because you need it. And then so you layer on a lower end video offering for them. So that's one way I think it could play out and actually accelerate the trend. The second, on consumption-based billing, I think is really interesting. So 2 things I would say on this. One is, I think politically it will be hard to go down that path. Number 2, I would say if you're a cable operator, I would say like not having consumption-based billing is actually an advantage over wireless. Because what's the coming battle that's coming in the next couple of years is 4G against wireline broadband. And how much does that nip at the base of the cable broadband homes out there? So I would say one of the things that if I was a cable company, I wouldn't want consumption-based billing, because I would want to say to my customer base, you get all you can eat, it's not metered, and we can help you deploy Wi-Fi in your home, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think mechanically, from an over-the-top perspective, the way we look at it, we actually studied this in Canada because they have it. So we basically found somebody and asked them to watch Netflix for a month over the top and to show us their bill before and after. And it allows you to do a lot of interesting things. Like you basically know like 1 gig of viewership or 1 hour of viewership equates to a gig of bandwidth in standard def. And my only point here is that then allows you to say like, well, how much, if you did all your TV viewing over the top, how much bandwidth would you consume? And then you can see, at what different levels of consumption, what the impact of the broadband bill was. But where I think you're going to see the most prevalent amount of over-the-top substitution is for the low-end viewer. So if you look at TV viewing by quintile in the U.S., the lowest quintile viewer watches half an hour of television a day. And so if you assume that all of their viewing is over the top and it's done as a substitute to linear TV viewing, and do the math on that, it's like only like 30 gigs a month or something like that. It's actually not that, and that's 20% of the population that could do that.
And how much did it cost in Canada?
The way Rogers structured it, I think it was like an increment. Your bill went up.
$20?
Yeah, it was like $15.
$15.
Yeah.
Do you want to comment on?
I did have Comment. So one of the things you have with consumers, marketing people are really important to this process, and one of the things that consumers really, the minute you give a consumer more than 3 choices, they can't, it's very hard for them to make a decision, kind of silver, gold, platinum, done. And that's what the cable industry has today. So when we think about, I actually think the world, I'm going to disagree a little bit with Spencer here, I really do think that to keep the infrastructure intact, you must charge on usage. So the telcos are. I think, Time Warner tried, got their ass handed to them in DC, so they did it poorly, and Comcast has been burned. Comcast, being the big guy, can't do it first. So my guess is the cable industry collaborates, they'll all sit around and they'll get Cox or CVC, they'll get one of the little guys to do it, usage-based billing, and they'll say, look, the telcos are doing it, and then another little guy will do it, and Comcast will be last. But you must end up with usage-based billing because the internet can't really take this downstream video. It's very, very hard on it. So I watch a ton of Netflix, and I watch a ton of television, but I slow the node for everybody in my node. So I should be getting charged more. I shouldn't be getting charged the same as the 20% that doesn't watch TV. So I think economically the world must move to usage-based billing. I think it will be slow because the politicians really don't like it. But at the end of the day, watching video over the top is a luxury that should be paid for.
Well, to your point, that's exactly what I'm hearing and seeing happening. Is there actually is, by virtue of the FCC's latest rulings, a little bit of breathing room for doing, usage-based billing.
But I just want to make one point.
Yeah.
The consumer cannot tolerate uncertainty. He cannot tolerate not knowing what his bill's going to be at the end of the month. It scares him to death. That's why you end up in the mobile world with tiers. You can use this many bits for $40. You can use that many bits. So that's how I think it ends up. It does end up with tiers, but it's based on usage
Right.
because it's too scary for consumers.
Right.
And by the way, the consumers a lot of time will tell you, cut off my TV at $40 a month because that's all I can afford. He needs to have the certainty of that he doesn't, or get warnings like you do on your mobile phone. You've overused. Do you want to stop using your cell phone for data, or do you want to pay more, $15 more, and we'll put you in the next tier?
You've watched too much Jersey Shore.
You've watched too much Jersey Shore.
The point I was making is that, yes, to your point, smaller operators are looking at exactly that, because in this telco or cable, they're looking at ways to get competitive with what's happening against them on the DBS side with HD and with so much VOD now in the marketplace. They're trying to figure out how to do this in ways that are cost effective, which means going to the cloud, new technologies out there to allow them to do things much more cost effectively than they otherwise would. But in that process, looking at usage-based or tier-based billing on the broadband side as a way to leverage some deals and get the Netflix of the world to play ball with them and aggregate around their service and get a much better viewing experience for their customers than they otherwise would if it's just being done in a best effort way. And given the fact that the customer's going to have to pay for that higher tier service on the broadband, then it becomes cost effective for Netflix to say, I'd rather partner with you than lose my customers because they're getting charged for this higher premium. So there's a lot of planning going on in business plans to roll this thing out at the second, third, fourth tier levels in the marketplace right now. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, Fred, back to Stuart's original question on what incentive do the Netflixes of the world have in working with the broadband providers? Stuart's question was the broadband providers working with the Netflixes of the world, but will the Netflixes of the world work with the broadband providers?
Well,
I
if
think
they have that sword hanging over their head, they might.
Yeah, no, I think there's the easy answer is yes, because it accelerates their subscriber growth. So for, really the Netflixes and the Hulu Pluses of the world are really network businesses, right? They're just the new version of your cable network. And
They're
this is
bundlers.
right, and they're the new aggregators, and the way their business model works, and you're seeing it, the vicious part of the cycle instead of the virtuous cycle, in the case of Netflix right now, is when They have fixed programming costs by and large for a period of time until they renegotiate. And in that period of time, if their subscriber growth accelerates or goes up, their margins go up. If it goes down, like Netflix is experiencing right now with their price increase, their margins get creamed. And that fixed cost is very, very, it creates a lot of operating leverage. So the easy answer is, yeah, like it accelerates subscriber growth. I don't think they're going to do it right now because I think right now they view it as like it'll clutter up the message, the marketing message right now.
Okay, Gary, we're going to have to get our questions answered and move quickly now because we're running
Very
out of
quick
time.
question. Spencer, you talked about attention. Laura, you talked about a short attention span. The future of television, in whatever format it has, video, is it going to be the half-hour, 60-minute, 2-hour movies type of format? Is that the only thing we can do? I mean, obviously with DVR, we can see a 60-minute show in 42 minutes at whenever time we want to, but is program production going to change to accommodate this? We already see it online, for example, in the 3-minute and 5-minute videos.
I mean,
Yes, Jim.
I don't have a specific view on like what's the right, time format for a show. I mean, to me, I think it's really just about the quality of the show more than anything else. And if you can deliver quality and engagement and an engaging piece of content to a user in a 3-minute video because your dog is skateboarding down the street, then that's great, right? But I'm not sure that like the length of time of a piece of content is the critical factor. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would venture to guess yes, mostly because that's, at least based on my experience, they tend to be creatures of habit.
Okay, next question.
Hi, my name's Josh Wine. I write about media business for Communications Daily. Spencer, if what you say about the coming battle is between 4G wireless and wireline, what do you guys make of the announcement this morning that the major cable operators are selling a bunch of wireless spectrum to Verizon to be deployed for 4G wireless, presumably?
Interesting choice. It's a really good question. And full disclosure, I have a colleague, Stefan Anninger, who covers cable directly for us. I'm not sure specifically what the motivation was right now for selling the AWS spectrum, but I think the cable guys will ultimately have to find some sort of wireless solution. I think it's just too important. Maybe they just came to the conclusion that this was a better MPV trade, or that maybe Wi-Fi is a better technological solution. But I'm not sure.
I think just from my own knowledge of what's going on technologically, the cable guys are being persuaded that the next generation Wi-Fi and some of the use of their networks to support distribution like that is actually a very cost-effective way to go.
It's faster.
And it's much faster to deploy. They don't have to do an entire new infrastructure. It's taken a long while for them to come around to that. Obviously, they've gone through several permutations of trying to launch their own wireless services, and none of that has worked out very well. Clearwire is struggling for survival right now, and they are hanging on whether that works out. But on the other hand, they could just buy Clearwire and have done with the AWS. But be that as it may, there is this other technological alternative, which Cablevision was the first one to jump into, and is showing it works.
Right. Or they could do something. We had Boingo at our conference earlier this week, and they obviously deploy Wi-Fi globally. And so you kind of wonder if they're a potential partner also for the cable guys. They have a wholesale business.
Okay, one more question. Oh, I thought I saw another hand.
Back there.
So I was kind of surprised that there was consensus amongst the panel around IP being the future of video. And we did have some hints later on about, there are some real practical issues about the fact that the internet doesn't have enough bandwidth. I think, Netflix takes up, nearly half the internet bandwidth at peak times. We're into only 20 million households watching 7 hours of video a week. So, I'm just confused as to how your arithmetic works to say that the future of video is all going to be IP-based.
So I was pretty open-ended about the future and what time frame that was, right? So look, I mean, and that was purposeful on my part. So I'm not a technologist. So there are clearly bandwidth limitations today, but I think over time, the internet has proven to be pretty scalable. So I think the long-run trend is that more and more video will be delivered over IP, and then when it becomes 100%, or if that happens, we can probably debate.
I would just very quickly add that there are technological solutions around IP that are being designed just around the bandwidth question. Also, the bandwidth availability is going up by virtue of how in the cable's case, the HFC network can cost effectively migrate to accommodate this stuff. But there's also the idea that, as IP comes in, then you free up the bandwidth with your existing MPEG-2 digital distribution. So there are combinations of things in play right now that don't necessarily look at all like things look now with respect to how much bandwidth gets consumed by people watching Netflix. We have to call it a halt. This has been a great discussion.
Thanks, Fred.
Certainly one that we will be reporting on for some time to come. I would like to invite our next panel to come right up. We won't take a break, as I said, and we'll launch into the social media session right away. Thank you guys very much.